You deserved everything you got. This is a union city.
That is a Philadelphia tradition.
Seize the means of podcasting.
Oh God, the boss has crushed us.
Let me tell you one thing else.
In oldie-timey times,
Who said it? Kanye West or Thomas
we
Paine?
will not raw dog reality for that one.
The pleasure of the flesh is in solidarity.
The Scab Buster.
It's gonna be wholly unprofessional.
Eight together strong. Let that be your mantra.
Hello and welcome to the Labor John Podcast.
Hello.
Where we chit-chat about the working class history of Philadelphia and the surrounding world. My name is Sam, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host.
I'm Gabe.
Hi, Gabe. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good.
I'm glad. Today, you have something amazingly special, the best episode you've ever come up with. The research is impeccable. You told all this off mic, right?
Yep.
Yeah. You promise? You said all this?
You've said all of that.
No, this came out of your mouth hole, sir.
Lots of things do.
Well, Gabe, let's put things into people's ear holes. Gabe, what do we have for these lovely listeners today?
Okay. Well, I like trains.
Okay.
Kind of a lot. They're fun.
Oh no, Gabe's weird fixations are coming out.
They go choo choo. They are big.
Oh God.
And they're ecologically more efficient than cars. But the people who make the trains run aren't always treated very well. And there was a cat. And
yeah, Emerus has joined the recording.
Emerus likes trains too.
Emerus loves trains. That's his favorite thing. Oh my God.
And now my cat's meow. Oh, well, I locked my cat in here with
So
me.
did I. I didn't realize it until I heard the meows and the clawing at the doors.
Anyway, so 1877.
God, we need to shell out money for a real studio. I can't do this anymore. We can't be interrupted by cats constantly. We're trying to get money from people and shit. We're professional.
Without the kitty litter, the audio quality
That's
suffers.
true.
We have learned
People
this.
do not know this, but cat litter is a perfect, like, acoustic.
Damn.
There she is.
She's a little happy.
All right, Gabe.
Anyway.
Probably for the
We're
best
gonna
that we got interrupted by our cats because you were just going to go off. But I want to hear about trains and the people who operate them and work on these trains not being treated fairly.
We're going to talk about the 1877 railroad strike in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Because we've touched on this with the Reading Railroad Massacre already.
Our third most cheery episode?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it did have the Conchi boys. So, like, it kind of had a happy ending, almost.
That's a great episode. I love the Conchi boys.
But that was the Reading Railroad. Yeah. Now we're going to be talking about the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Pennsylvania Railroad, 1877.
Yeah. Actually, going back to the 1820s.
Oh, God.
Because you had
50 years, 57 years. We're going to do
this is going to be a very truncated history of the Pennsylvania Railroad. But it's important because there's a lot of this story is impacted by stuff that happens outside of Philadelphia.
No, honestly, I make jokes about it every episode, Gabe, about the background that you like to do. But I mean, that is very important. You need to have the background for everything. It helps you understand.
Context.
It's context.
What? I need to insert Kamala Harris context quote here.
Gabe. Like a trade, we're going to go right past that.
So this started in the early 1800s. Pennsylvania businessmen needed a way to compete with the Erie Canal up in New York, and they were starting to get overshadowed by other cities and outcompeted. So they created this thing called the Main Line of Public Works, which was supposed to be a whole series of canals going across the whole province or commonwealth, state. And then, but they very quickly realized that that wasn't going to be enough, and they added railroads railroads and inclined planes, which is just like, it's a very sloping hill that you can roll stuff down or up. Yeah.
All right.
It's before they started putting steam engines on
They just roll
trains.
it.
They had they literally would like pull it up a hill with a horse and then let it roll down the other side.
We're a simple species, Gabe.
Yeah. It was more efficient than other methods. So, okay, so you had this thing called the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, which was running all the way from the greatest city on earth to Philadelphia, from Columbia, Pennsylvania. Then in 1846, Pennsylvania legislature provided a charter for the Pennsylvania Railroad, which ran from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Then in 1852, or by 1852, you could take a train from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, but that was across 7 different railroad companies. Yep.
Damn. So that's 7 different trains, you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
But you could make the journey by train.
Yeah.
It was just very complicated.
Hypothetically, you could.
Yeah. So then, over the next 25 years, the Pennsylvania Railroad basically just like gobbled up every other rail line in, I'd say, the southern half of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Because Reading was controlling from Reading, Pennsylvania, up north and like into the Anthracite region, as we've talked about before. Yeah. But Pennsylvania was running along the southern half from Philly to Pittsburgh, and then beyond Pittsburgh eventually.
Was that more? Is there a difference with the like passenger trains in the southern part of the state as compared to like the northern part, where there'd be more just like coal trains?
I think the PRR. I'm not sure.
Okay, that was a curious question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think my guess is the Pennsylvania was probably running more passenger service, because the Reading, especially by the end of the 1800s, Reading was like a railroad that served a conveniently named Reading Coal and Iron Company, totally unrelated to the Reading Railroad. But the Pennsylvania was like more of what you would think of when you think of a railroad.
Okay.
It wasn't this like weird sort of conglomerate that the Reading was. Not that the Pennsylvania didn't have some other weird, shady business dealings.
I'm sure they all did, Gabe.
Oh God, yeah. But they also ran service up to New York and down into New Jersey as well.
Okay. I say bring back the railroad barons.
I mean, if you get decent passenger service, fine. I'd take it at this point.
Capitalism is okay if the trains run on time.
I mean,
you heard it here first.
Yeah. Anyway, so moving on. Also in so eventually the Pennsylvania Railroad moved their headquarters to Philadelphia.
Okay.
And at this point, they were definitely the largest railroad in Pennsylvania. Yeah. They were one of the largest, or by 1877, I think they were one of the largest in the country. Within like 10 years after what we're talking about right now, they'd be the largest corporation on Earth. And basically like ran U.S. politics. Even in this point, they had a lot of very strong influence with both Philadelphia and the federal government, and Pennsylvania government as well. So everyone in Philadelphia basically lived in the shadow of either the Pennsylvania Railroad or the Reading Railroad.
Okay.
And the city was like crisscrossed with all of their tracks. Down on Washington Avenue, there used to be freight service that would just run across the city and like occasionally murder children.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
What?
they're killing children was a very big part of early railroading because there wasn't any like separation between pedestrian areas
Yeah.
and train tracks.
Okay.
So kids just got ran over a lot.
All right.
And it was just kind of part of life.
Jesus.
So
God.
yeah, grade separation is an important thing. So that was the state of the railroad, like one of the most powerful entities in North America at this point, and pretty much controlling Philadelphia politics. But the railroad strike actually starts back in 1873.
Okay.
Or it has its roots in 1873. Because that was when there was a panic in the stock market, which led to a long depression.
Of course.
Yeah, which is actually it is still the longest depression in U.S. history.
Is it really?
Yeah, it outlasted the Great Depression by like almost 2 years. And that all started because there was a guy named Jay Cook who owned a bunch of the Northern Pacific Railway. And he was a banker and basically like financed the Union Army during the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of these things.
Yeah.
Where you have like the entire U.S. economy held up by one guy. So Jay Cook and Company, which was also headquartered in Philly,
Of course.
and essentially overextended itself. And then there was an economic crisis in Europe, which meant that he couldn't sell any bonds to European markets, which meant that his credit in the US was now bad because he couldn't he couldn't leverage anything against the European market. And then when he started to lose credit in the US, he didn't have anything to build that back up with. So on September 18th, 1873...
he's going to take it out on the workers. Fuck.
Actually, no. His firm... Well, I mean, in the long run, yes. But his firm declared bankruptcy, which then caused a chain reaction across the whole U.S. economy.
It's great that it can just do that, you know?
Yeah, just like
one person.
Guy, yeah, just fucking up. And then the whole economy collapses. And it's great that this seems to happen every 7 to 10 years for no reason. So that caused the whole economy to collapse.
That's crazy.
And then 4 years later, in 1877, you had railroad workers who were doing like backbreaking, dangerous jobs. And were then also dealing with ever increasing prices because the fun part of economic collapse is also usually lots of inflation.
Interesting.
Yeah. They also kept dealing with wage cuts. So prices were going up, wages were going down, and no one had any job security because everyone else on Earth got laid off. And like it effectively, it was just a real shitty situation.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. Then you also had, behind the scenes, you had the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and no, it's just the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers at this point.
The
BOLE. And the Knights of Labor.
Oh, friends of the show.
And both of them had been organizing. Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers was a much more conservative union than the Knights of Labor. They tended to not support striking as much. And they were much more like in the old-fashioned craft union approach of like, we're going to negotiate everything with the bosses, and labor and capital just has to come to an agreement.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, but what happens if they don't come to an agreement?
yeah. Yeah.
That was explained away quite well, Gabe. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Then at this point, the Knights of Labor were also still mostly underground. So they, like we've talked in previous episodes, they were founded in 1869 in Philly, and were a much more radical, almost industrial union. That was like the stage that has been set. And then in July 1877,
there we go.
The president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad cut wages by 10%.
Yeah. Okay.
Which on July 14th, workers...
You're a crumb creep.
I'm going to do that for all the bosses.
Workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, refused to let freight traffic through, which started the strike.
Okay.
So the strike then very, very quickly spread from Martinsburg across all of the railroads, and like you could basically track it moving from city to city. Like as different trains arrived, they would bring news that this was happening, and then a strike would kick off in that city.
I love that it's the trains, the company trains moving that is spreading the news of the strikes and everything.
Yeah. And that it's also really interesting because that's how all of the organizing was happening as well. Because like you basically
that's how you got around back then too, was just the trains.
But you also had like an already mobile workforce that was going to go from one depot and travel to another depot. That was just what their job was, and then they're going to get off the train and talk to everybody at that depot.
You go.
And like it was really a perfect setup for doing really broad organizing. So the strike like I said, spread very quickly. By July 19th, workers in Pittsburgh were on strike. They refused to move their trains, and then the Pennsylvania Railroad tried to replace them with scabs. The replacements refused to scab, and the strike then just kept growing exponentially after that. Yeah. So
I love when people have a conscience, you know?
Yeah.
A good conscience.
And there was also, because everyone else was also dealing with all of the impact from the Depression, basically the whole community came out to support the strikers in Pittsburgh. Or at least a large portion, like literally thousands of people came out. So the police initially tried to break up the crowds, force everyone back to work. But
are the police ever on the fucking side of the workers? Jesus God, Christ Almighty, Gabe.
In Hazleton, Pennsylvania, in 1934.
Should have saw that coming.
For at least one day.
All right. I stand down.
Them and Sid Hatfield.
There we go.
So the crowd outgrew the police's ability to contain them, and the National Guard got called in. But the local troops in Pittsburgh were sympathetic to the strikers.
Damn, I love it. Yep.
Because this, at this point, the National Guard was basically just like a militia levy. So there was a fear that they might not be able to quell the unrest. One of the militiamen was quoted by the paper saying, "We may be militiamen, but we are workmen first."
Oh, I love it.
Yep. So a request was made for additional troops to come in from outside Pittsburgh. The decision was made that 600 troops would be dispatched from Philadelphia on the 21st.
Please tell me they sent the Kanji boys.
No. These were the like somewhat more professional militia from the Philadelphia barracks.
All right.
Or the Philadelphia Armory.
It's smart to send people not from your city, though, you know?
Yes, especially from the two rival cities.
Yeah, there you go.
Like, a lot of times this gets described as the time that Philadelphia invaded Pittsburgh. Because it's kind of what happened. Like,
that's not a good thing.
We did an internal colonialism. So those 600 troops came into Pittsburgh and faced a crowd of over 2,000 angry citizens. Tried to disperse them. The crowd responded by throwing stones and firing pistols at them, who then responded by charging them with bayonets.
Jesus.
And then continuously fired volleys into the crowd for 10 minutes.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes is a long time.
So in the end, 20 men, women, and children were killed.
Oh, man.
With many others wounded. And after that, basically all hell broke loose in Pittsburgh. Because they just saw a bunch of people get massacred.
Yeah, and they lost the Stanley Cup that year too.
Yeah, it was just a bad time. So both the workers and their supporters, just the citizens of Pittsburgh, started to target all of the PRR or the Pennsylvania's buildings and depots throughout the city.
Right.
And basically just torched everything.
Well, like that's one way to do it.
Yeah, they just went to every roundhouse and depot building and lit it on fire because they were really pissed.
It's there. Do it.
So while all of this is happening in Philly, they're getting like a play-by-play dispatch from one of the PRR telegraphers who's still like sitting in the office watching all of this happen, sending reports back to the Pennsylvania or to the PRR offices in Philly or to the headquarters. So all of the executives in Philly are starting to freak the fuck out because they know, one, Philly has been hit just as hard as Pittsburgh. There's probably just as many angry people in this city, and we're in this city, and they might come and kill us, and that would be bad.
I love this slowly dawning on them, going, "Wait a minute,
we're here." Or even worse, they might damage some company property.
And we have 600 less militiamen in our city.
So. Yes, that's the other thing. Like, they just sent a lot of troops over there. They also knew that at this point the workers in Reading were striking. It hadn't gotten as violent there yet, but like they were starting to feel very kind of closed in on. So July 22nd, crowds gathered around the West Philadelphia Depot. This is a Sunday. Reports of violence in Pittsburgh had been well circulated, and everyone was very anxious to see what would happen. The crowd formed at around 32nd and Market over in West Philly, basically like the far end of where 30th Street Station is now. But at this point, it was peaceful, and both uniformed and, as the newspaper described them, barely disguised detectives.
Okay, what are they wearing, a Groucho mask or something?
Like, I guess so. I'm imagining like they have their detective badge and they just like stuck a railroad ticket in front of it.
Okay.
And they're just like, yes, I'm here for the railroad.
I'm undercover.
Uh,
Wait a minute. No, shit.
yeah, no.
When's the train come? The 9:15. Yes.
Mm. So, and
I
so
love the
they
newspapers.
were.
I love these.
Oh, yeah,
I love
it was
you
great.
pulling these random just quotes from these newspapers.
So at 7 a.m., a train arrived from Pittsburgh carrying 2 wounded militiamen.
Oh, okay.
And the crew of the train itself had been attacked by the strikers for scamming.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So both the crew and the wounded militiamen were like rushed away from the crowd before anyone realized who they were. Then later that morning, 50 locomotive engineers were brought into the offices of the Pennsylvania Railroad and asked to sign a letter stating that they would stand by the company regardless of what happens.
Oh.
So
Man, they're making them sign a pledge just right there and then?
yeah.
All right.
So the men said they weren't going to go on strike, but they refused to sign the paper, basically saying they also weren't willing to risk being shot or dragged off of their engines for the company. So like, we're not going to fight you, but we're also not going to fight for you.
Yeah. Okay. That's a smart move. That's not a smart move.
It's fair enough. The least you can do is not scab. So in an effort to avoid any violence, the PRR decided to suspend all westbound freight traffic for Sunday on the 22nd. Okay. Now, normally there wasn't any freight traffic on Sundays anyway, but they wanted to be especially sure that nothing was going to happen. By the afternoon of the 22nd, the crowd outside of the depot had grown even larger. Folks were basically just kind of like hanging out, but no strike had been called at this point. But again, everyone was kind of freaking out that there was this giant crowd hanging out while everything in Pittsburgh was blowing up. So Mayor Stokely released. I should also mention, Mayor Stokely's entire family was currently up in Long Branch, New Jersey, which is only reachable by the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Oh, no.
And his family was due to come back that day.
Oh.
So he's freaking the fuck out because like his train's going to come in and he doesn't know what's going to happen to his family. So he released a statement basically saying everyone should return home and stay peaceful. And any violence would discredit the fair name of Philadelphia.
Oh, God. Our mayors have not changed.
No, they really haven't. And you have to return to office, but
all right, you broke me with that one. Shout out to AFSME, fighting a good fight.
Yeah, seriously. So shortly after Stokely's special train from Long Branch, because he had his own mayoral train.
No, of course he did. Of course he did.
So the mayor's train came back with his family. Everyone departed. And then basically once his whole family was gone, the crews struck. So they
okay.
Yep. They doused their fires, got off the engine, and they're like, we're on strike now.
All right.
So
they had a pack of dogs with them too, as well.
Yeah, apparently.
I love. It's like we're going all dimensions here, baby. 4D. You're gonna be smelling us by the next episode.
Well, with this heat, you might be able to smell me from here anyway. So, and importantly, this was both the mainline branches of the PRR, those are the ones running from Philly to Pittsburgh, and the New York service, which ran from Philly north, went up into Jersey and then up to New York. And this was one of the first times that like both of these branches had done coordinated action.
Yeah,
because they seem to have operated fairly separately. So by 6 p.m., the only crews working on a PRR train were handling mail cars, which the strikers declared they would let through.
All right.
It was not clear to me if they were letting passenger cars through, because they let at least one passenger train through, but only because it had mail on it. But they let all the passenger cars as well. It was
okay. Well, I mean, like they're mainly targeting freight, right? So
yeah,
just
that
a
was
smarter move.
Yeah, that's where the company makes the actual money. Most of the time, when you got a railroad charter, you got a charter to move freight, and then as an addendum, you had to also provide a passenger service. So none of these railroad companies wanted to do passenger service.
I love companies. I love corporations, Gabe.
Yeah, it's great. So
they're here for us, Gabe.
They are. That's why we need to bring back railroad barons. Because the crews were allowing mail to continue, they couldn't shut down the railway entirely. So instead, they basically just took over the tracks. So they still had switchmen positioned at every switch and junction.
Yeah.
They had like all of the normal operations of the railroad were ostensibly happening, but if a freight train came in without mail on it, they would just divert it immediately to the roundhouse, take the engine off or uncouple the engine, douse the fire, and they're like, "Yep, sorry,
you're done."
Yep. But like they effectively, as much as you can occupy a railroad, they basically just took over the whole system because they were the ones who did it anyway. And yeah, so they basically just took the whole thing over.
Those 10% pay cuts are maybe you shouldn't have done that, guys. Maybe you should have done that.
Yeah.
Oh shit, we don't actually control our own railroad? The workers do? Oh
no. So the massive crowd of people that had been milling about the depot slowly dissipated between 6 p.m. and sundown. And the police had also tightened their control around 32nd Street Station. And basically everyone assumed that the crowd had just kind of gone home. And they didn't really think about it past that.
All right. Gabe, where did this crowd go?
So after dark, the crowd reemerged.
What?
This time on the bluff overlooking the railroad. So if you look at 32nd Street Station, there's the train tracks run north along the curve of the Schuylkill.
Yeah.
And then there's a hill along the eastern side of the train tracks. So the crowd was initially down at the depot at like 32nd and Market. They kind of disappeared and then showed up like 3 blocks north on this bluff, looking down over the tracks. So, and at that point, they effectively had full control of the train. Like the police had control of the depot. The workers had control of the
actual
going
tracks.
to the depot. Yeah. The important part of all of this. Then
did they know that? Did they know where the crowd had?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the police were aware that had happened.
Okay.
And so far, PRR had also not tried to bring in any replacements or send any freight out.
All right.
Until engine number 435, with a load of coal oil tanker cars, was getting ready to pull out towards Harrisburg. And then a crowd of over 300 strikers surrounded the engine and kindly asked the engineer to just step down, informing him that there was a strike on and no freight was to leave the city.
Okay.
The engineer obliged.
All right.
435 was uncoupled from the tankers, taken back to the roundhouse, and its fires were doused. Then at 9:10 p.m., a passenger train started out with a shifting engine, which is like a smaller engine that you move a train between larger engines.
Okay.
So a passenger train started out with a shifting engine and a loaded mail car. Again, like huge crowd of people just emerging almost from nowhere surrounded this engine. Told the engineer, "You have to get off. There's a strike on." He explained that he has a mail car. So they allowed it to go to 33rd Street, at which point they uncoupled the shifting engine, brought it back, and doused the fires.
My God.
And then they were basically just like, the train's just going to stay there until another train or until another engine comes and picks it up. And that's it. They also started putting torpedoes on the tracks.
Excuse me?
Yeah. So I didn't know this is what they were called. But they're basically a small little explosive charge.
What?
But it's a signaling device. So you put like a little pack of explosives down on the track. The train drives over it, and the engineer hears an explosion and says, "Oh, I should stop the train and apply the brakes."
Okay.
And so they had these things available.
All right.
And they just started putting them out on the tracks to tell any train coming in there's a strike on. It didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one way.
It doesn't do. Yeah. It doesn't really like damage anything, or at least not that much. And the crowd apparently enjoyed watching them because it was kind of like fireworks.
I love that they're having so much fun with this, though.
Yeah.
They're staring down trains and lighting off fireworks.
And at this point, it seems like they're allowing passenger service.
Okay.
But any passenger train that comes and goes does get like hooted and hollered at a lot because they're going to do that. So the police, however, were getting more and more nervous about this and made a few attempts to clear them out. Each time the cops would approach, the strikers would whistle and call, or whistles and calls would come out from the crowd, supposedly calling for reinforcements. And the cops at this point were already outnumbered about 10-1, so they didn't want to risk fighting them. So they would immediately back down every time. They would like start to move towards them, bunch of whistles, and then they would just retreat. Finally, the chief of police ordered reinforcements from the central depot. Lieutenant Curry came down with 45 reserve officers walking down the train tracks from the north. So you had, it was about 30 there was like 20 or 30 cops coming up from the depot, 45 coming down from the north. And he got to the bluff where the crowd was and called out, "Gentlemen, you will have to leave that bank. The place must be kept clear."
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The crowd responded by just yelling insults at him.
I think not.
One person from the crowd was reported to have said, "Stand firm, men." But right after he said that, another 30 cops showed up to support Curry. And the crowd again started yelling insults at them.
God, I love this crowd.
Oh, yeah. Then they started throwing rocks at them.
All right. Okay. Now I love them.
Yeah. Curry responded by calling out, "At them with your clubs." And the cops charged up the hill into the crowd that was still throwing rocks downhill at them. And after a very long fight of the cops basically just clubbing everything that was in front of them, they did manage to disperse the crowd. The only reported casualty was one wounded reserve officer who had a stone hit him in the shoulder.
Oh, okay.
But also no one checked on or no one asked the crowd or any of the civilians who just got beaten up with a bunch of clubs. So there might have been more injuries than that, but no arrests were made though. And more reinforcements, or by midnight, they brought in more reinforcements, and they basically set up like a military encampment along the railroad tracks to make sure that no one else would come up onto the bluff. And so while all of that fighting was going on, strikers had been moving from freight yard to freight yard, putting out every single fire and turning out every light in the depot.
Okay.
And basically this was their way of making sure that everything was or stayed out. So they would go in, quench all of the fires in the boilers of the train engines so that they couldn't be used, or you have to go in and restart the fire from scratch. Yeah. And then they would douse the lanterns in every shed so that you could see from a distance whether or not people were working in there.
All right. Okay.
Because the moment you saw a light, you're like, oh, someone's trying to scab. So
for an ad hoc strike, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
They got some tactics.
Yeah. And this is the one point where the newspaper fails me and doesn't give me clear descriptions of where the strikers were versus where the cops were. Because everyone is moving along train tracks at this point.
Yeah. Everybody.
So but while they were sneaking around to all the yards, 275 cops stretched out over the tracks along the Callow Hill Bridge, basically making sure that no strikers could take over those tracks from I think it was the Callow Hill Depot, or the Callow Hill Police Depot, all the way down to West Philly on the other side of the Schuylkill. But the only interaction that the cops had with strikers while that was going on was one cop who found a group of 12 strikers and told them to stay back. They responded by saying, "Oh, we'll obey you. We've got no rocks." Which is just like the most Philly thing.
It's like, all right. So they're looking around, they're like, there's no shit. We ain't got no rocks. All right, man.
Yeah. You got
us. You got us. We're going home.
Yeah. And then while all of this craziness is going on, and there's still more rumors and actual news of everything happening in Pittsburgh coming back. That's
crazy.
So so everyone is just like more and more on edge, because basically all of the workers and the citizens are like, all right, we need to get ready because we have an opportunity to like actually have a revolution here. All of the police are freaking out because they recognize, there's a possibility that there's going to be a revolution tonight. There was a train due from Pittsburgh at 7:20 a.m. or at 7:20 p.m. that never arrived. And they think that it got stopped at Harrisburg, but no one was entirely sure. So there was just like this one whole train, probably a passenger train with wounded militia on it, that has at this point disappeared.
That's not good.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, actually.
So, yeah.
Please tell me they've never found that train, and there's a ghost train somewhere out there on the line.
So Mayor Stokely requested the assistance of federal troops, and the state militia in their barracks had been drilling all throughout the day, ready to get deployed if everything got more heated. There was some confusion with 600 federal troops from Baltimore who were supposed to arrive in the early morning of the 23rd, but never showed up because they never requested the train that was needed to transport them.
Okay.
So, yeah. there were 600 troops in Baltimore ready to come up, but no one thought to ask for a train.
They're just standing there?
I guess so.
All right.
Yeah. So the 23rd is mostly a quiet day. The entire city is still very much on edge. And there are still reports of violence kept coming in from now Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and Reading. Along the Callow Hill Bridge, a crowd had formed at the lower entrance. The police yelled at them to move. They refused, and then charged them with their clubs.
All right.
Or the police then charged them with their clubs.
Police only know how to do like 3 things.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Basically.
I'm not going to list them, but
you know.
You know.
You know. So federal troops started to arrive at the city. It was 4 companies of the 1st Artillery Regiment from Boston.
Damn.
And then 4 more companies of the 1st Artillery Regiment from Newport, Rhode Island.
All right.
They established a camp near the West Philly Depot and then set up an artillery battery behind the roundhouse.
God.
Aiming up the railroad tracks. Basically, like, if a crowd shows up, we're just going to commit mass murder. And yeah. So while the troops were setting up, a crowd had gathered in a grove about a mile outside of the city. It wasn't clear where this was. Police spies were able to get to the outskirts.
Okay.
And reported that a demonstration was being planned for the evening of the 23rd. At which point, or when that report came in, they just swarmed West Philly, or the West Philly Depot, with cops.
Yeah.
And so it seems that the crowd or the strikers figured out, like, oh, they found out, and they called it off, because they also realized we'd be going up against, let's see, 8 companies of artillery.
Holy shit!
Yeah,
I wonder how many guns that is, because that's probably at least 800 people, right?
I don't know what an artillery company is.
Yeah, I guess it's different.
But but yeah, it was a full.
I mean, one cannon is enough.
Yeah,
what are we splitting hairs for?
It was a large battery of artillery.
Artillery. Let's just stop it at artillery. There's artillery.
Yeah.
From New England who came down to Philadelphia right now. They're aimed at our citizens. This is not good.
So yeah, in the story of the 1877 strike is Philadelphia invades Pittsburgh and Boston invades Philadelphia.
New York, you got to invade Boston. It's the only thing you got to do here.
By the 24th, it seemed like all of the major violence in the city had been avoided. There had been that huge crowd that gathered at the northern. There had been a huge crowd that gathered at the northern depot of the PRR. But the only disturbance that happened there was one man named Joseph Miller, who jumped on a shifting engine and told the engineer that he was a militiaman and that he would provide him protection.
What? Okay.
There's like a non-zero chance that Miller was very drunk at this point, is my guess. Or that he was going to try and extort him in like some weird protection rackety thing.
Okay.
So he told the engineer he was a militiaman. Then basically the crowd just took Miller off of the engine.
Joe, you gotta go home, bud.
Yeah,
your wife has been calling you.
Joe Miller did later on throw a rock at the engineer, but missed.
All right.
And then after that, he was very, very quickly arrested and held on bail for $1,000.
The only time in this story that I'm fine with the police doing something.
Yeah, like
this man.
He probably needed to be removed from that situation.
That man needed to be in the drunk tank.
Yeah,
that poor fella.
So
Emrys,
slowly
get away from the microphone, buddy.
slowly, railroad workers in Philly started to return to their work at the West Philly Depot.
Oh, okay.
And then federal troops left the city shortly after. I couldn't find an exact date on when that happened.
Fooled you. Strike number 2,
But-
part 2.
yeah.
We have your cannons
But-
now.
Yeah. But that, and I know this was like fairly anticlimactic, but this was the 1877 railroad strike in Philly. But I wanted to look into it because Philly was one of the few cities where there wasn't a huge amount of violence.
Well,
Yeah.
My idea, violence isn't just. Why is it always violence when it's the strikers?
True.
Having a cannon aimed at you is violence.
That's a very good point, actually. I should say Philly was one of the few cities where there wasn't a large amount of property destruction.
Okay.
Is a more accurate way to
that
state
perfect
this.
distinction, Gabe. Thank you very much.
And that was in large part, I think, because they basically news of the strike traveled, or news of what was happening in Pittsburgh traveled faster than the strikers could organize to do the same thing, if that makes sense. Like, because they were getting the company was getting all of the dispatches in and freaking the fuck out.
It seemed like it like started just out of the blue and it ended out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was surprised that they just wrapped up. I mean, you have a battery of cannons pointed at you. I understand that, but I mean, it's fair, you know. And people are still at this time suffering. It's still a depression, so you know they decided they need to go back to work. What an interesting story, Gabe.
But I also, this was, at least from what I could tell, this was also one of the first cities where President Hayes deployed federal troops.
Oh, okay.
And that was a whole other thing that this ended up being the tactic that they used to put down every other strike in all of the other cities.
Yeah.
And so basically,
it worked here. It's going to work everywhere.
Yeah. Basically, what they did is like they quelled stuff in Philly and then sent the troops across Pennsylvania, and then sent them over to the Midwest, into like Chicago and St. Louis.
You know, that's kind of embarrassing, actually, as a city, that we were the first to, you know, that like the quelling of the quote unquote revolution started in Philly.
Yeah.
You know, we backed down first. That's not a Philly thing. We never backed down first, baby.
Yeah.
Then again, I never had a cannon pointed at my face, so no. I'm sitting behind a microphone. What am I going to say?
Yeah. Again, like, I can't fault people for not wanting to go up against 8 companies of artillery. I would not enjoy that experience.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And the moral is it took 8 companies of artillery to calm the unrest in Philly.
There you go.
So, yeah.
All right, we'll hang our hats on that one, Gabe.
Yeah. The
next time we win the Super Bowl, they're just going to bring in cannons to knock people off the street lights.
Yeah. But it did also...
I'm sorry, I just had a picture of an M109 howitzer pointing at some random drunk motherfucker out on South Street.
I mean, if you go on any of the Philadelphia area Facebook pages around a Super Bowl party, those ideas get floated a lot more seriously than they should.
Oh, they do. Get off Facebook.
It's a bad place. But yeah, so it also brought the Knights of Labor like to the forefront of the labor movement.
Yeah, okay.
And was a major like it would even though in Philly itself it got quelled very quickly. The strike as a whole was like a huge inflection point in American labor, especially after the Civil War, when there had been, you have like the really radical organizing in the early 1800s with all the working men's parties, and then it kind of calms down in the mid-century, and then like 1877, everything fucking explodes again. And then hasn't really calmed down that much since.
We still got those cannons pointed at us, bud.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm a little bit surprised. Well, it's because they had to go threaten to commit mass murder in other cities. Otherwise, those cannons would still be in West Philly. Just generally aimed at the populace. And thank God Frank Rizzo never had 8 companies of artillery.
Oh my God. Can you imagine what he would do?
Oh, it'd be bad.
With 1 piece of artillery. This is the most pro-police episode of Labor John that we've ever had, Gabe. I just said we back the blue.
Creative.
We back the blue in this podcast.
Again, I fully support U.S. Postal Service workers.
There we go.
They're doing God's work. So yeah, that was the 1877 railroad strike in Philadelphia, which is a little bit anticlimactic, but like there were some very interesting things that went on, even though it wasn't a torching everything like Pittsburgh.
You know what would happen if Joe went up to that engineer in that train and he found out that Mr. Frank Rizzo was in there? You know what Frank would say?
What would Frank say?
You're a crumb creep.